Broadcasting from Boston, Massachusetts, you're listening to the Technology Equals Equality podcast.
Hey, welcome back to the Technology Equals Equality podcast. I'm your host, Lori Brooks, and this is episode 58. Thank you guys so much for joining me here for this episode. I am super excited about today's episode as I get to welcome Big Joe to the show. Big Joe is the name given to him by the preschoolers he once taught, and it's the same name he now uses as a professional storyteller. Hailed as one of the best in the business by the Boston Globe, Big Joe has been delighting children and families for many years with his exciting storytelling show. With a huge collection of original and classic tales, as well as a box filled with puppets, props, and surprises, Big Joe has added lots of humor and fun to birthday parties, schools, libraries, and all kinds of events across New England. If you love stories, you'll love the unique and wonderful experience of seeing Big Joe the Storyteller. Joe, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So we would love to go ahead and jump into the story of how it is you once saw the future before you decided to become an entrepreneur.
When I was much younger, I wanted to be a firefighter. And then, when I learned there's actual fire involved, and I didn't want to be a firefighter anymore. Wanted to be a police officer, and then, they shoot at you, so I'm not doing that either. Safer career, that's what I was heading into. To kind of work with kids. I've always had, since I was younger, I was always the babysitter. I was always the one to take care of kids. I'm very good at making kids laugh and making kids happy. And I saw myself as some sort of either a teacher or an entertainer, something in that sort of realm. And I saw that, but it was growing up, as a boy, that's sort of frowned upon. You want to be a teacher? Why do you want to do that? And when I had a desire to become a preschool teacher, that was even more of a stigma. They're like, no, men don't go into preschool teaching. It's a field for mostly women. And, I said, no, that's, really what I want to do. And so when I went to college, I went to Wheelock, which is 99.9% women, which is kind of weird being, the only guy there. But that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get into teaching. Originally I wanted to teach, second or third grade, but I somehow managed to get myself into preschool teaching. And it became pretty nice, and that was what I liked. The problem is preschool teaching is not really a profession you can make a living off of. It's a tough little racket because they don't pay you much, and conditions are bad, the hours are bad, everything's kind of not good. And so I was at a point where suddenly the vision that I had for my future was kind of cloudy because as much as I wanted to be a teacher, teaching wasn't exactly the most profitable way to go or the best sort of way to go for me, and it was an easy job to get burnt out on, and that's what I was starting to do. I've always had a knack for telling stories. I've always been sort of a storyteller. People would say liar, but, when I'm not getting paid, it's lying. When I'm getting paid, it's storytelling. So it works out well. And in that regard, I've always been sort of that way. I've always been a storyteller. I'm the epitome of the joke. When I was 1, my parents thought I would never talk. When I was 2, they thought I'd never shut up. Pretty much been my life thus far. And even when I was, before I was a preschool teacher, I would tell stories. And when I taught preschool, I'd love story time. I'd love, reading books, making up my own stories, just being with that and engaging them in that way. And it always kind of, thrilled me. And I always thought to myself, while I was a preschool teacher, it would be so cool if I could just have these kind of moments of being able to interact with them through stories, telling stories, being, with them in that way. But I never thought, the sort of world of storytelling existed. They didn't have that on career day in high school. Be a storyteller. It was never mentioned. I never thought, and I knew storytellers existed. I mean, I've seen storytellers throughout my life and always loved them. Just never thought I could do it as a career. And we had a music guy who would come once a month to our preschool and sing songs to the kids. And I thought, what a great life he leads. He comes for an hour and he's gone. And here I am 8 hours a day dealing with 4-year-olds that are trying to kill me. What a great life this guy leads. And then one day I was bringing something into the office, and I happened to see the invoice that he had left in the office for his show. And I saw how much he was charging. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Here I was making 16 cents an hour practically, and he's getting that. I'm like, whoa. And so I sort of bent his ear, and I asked him. I said, "Is there a world out there for storytellers? I know there's like magicians and musicians and all kinds of creative things like that. But I said, are there storytellers?" He's like, "Well, there's not really a lot of storytellers for preschool ages and for the younger ages." And so I said, "Let me give it a shot." And so I put together some stories that I had and some stories that I knew, put it together a little thing, and I started kind of doing it as sort of a side thing to preschool teaching. Did it at parties, did it for little things, and eventually got bigger and bigger to the point where, I left teaching in general and got a job in an after-school program so I could have more time to perform. And then it just got bigger and bigger to the point where I could leave that job and, just become a storyteller full-time. And a bunch of years later, here we are talking to lovely people in Skype.
You are absolutely outstanding. I love that story, and I just want to take it back just a little bit because I think it's really important for the audience to hear a couple of quick pieces there, because as a kid, you really were, you were like any other kid. You had dreams, you had ideas, you were thinking of a firefighter or a policeman, and then, consciousness set in and risk aversion became a reality. And so as you started looking at who you were, really kind of taking a turn inwards and recognizing your own strengths and your passions and what it was you enjoyed, then you began realizing, what, I might want to be a preschool teacher. And you began following your own path until, again, you had a moment of consciousness where you realized it wasn't the lifestyle that you were looking for. It wasn't going to serve you in the manner that you wanted to, and there was so much more that you wanted to do, but you weren't feeling fulfilled. And I think that's important because there's so many people, Joe, you and I both know, there are so many people who are working jobs that they thought was their dream, but are no longer feeling fulfilled in that position, no matter what it might be. You may have reached a goal that you thought was that ultimate goal in life, and then kind of realized that you may need to shift gears, and being open and available to taking that pivot is extremely important. So you not only recognized once again that, what, this isn't necessarily something that's right for me, taking another look at yourself, you saw in someone else an expertise and an opportunity. And you didn't just sit back and say, oh, I wish or envy that. You took action. You recognized there was that opportunity, and you went and spoke to him. You took the initiative to ask, how did you do it? What the heck are you doing? And sometimes that's all it takes for you to get that little push and that little opportunity and that little bit of motivation and recognition that, what, I could pull this off too. I could definitely do it. And from there, you then took steps to set yourself up to make a smooth transition into where you wanted to be. Thank you for wrapping that all up.
Well, when you put it like that, yes. The story sounds awesome that way, I tell you. Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah.
I mean, you really did. You wrapped up such a journey there because you had these transitional moments and these moments where, you know what I mean? Where you realize, what, this isn't necessarily what it is that I need to be doing. And you took that time to reflect, but you didn't just reflect, you took the action, and that's so important. And that's kind of why I wanted to rewind there, because you pack so much in there, Jeff.
So, yeah, I tend to ramble on, so always feel free to stop me because I talk for a living. So this is the way I go.
You're hilarious. What do you think was one of the hardest parts of, making that transition when you began doing the storytelling on the side initially and just kind of testing out the waters? What do you feel was the most difficult part of going from that teaching position and doing this on the side to transitioning into, part-time on either side and then fully, transitioning into full-time storytelling?
The one word, to sum it up in one word, is paycheck. Because as little as they were paying me as a preschool teacher, every on Friday, they would give me a check. It wasn't a big check, but it was a check. And the dangerous part, or the scary part anyway, of becoming an entrepreneur and jumping out on my own is that uncertainty of not having a paycheck at the end of the week. I had my part-time job. I worked for an after-school program in East Boston, and remind me to tell you a little tangent story on that one because it's kind of fun and heartbreaking all at the same time. I got plenty of stories. But, I was getting a check from there, but that was just to sort of give me something to supplement my income. But the storytelling that I was doing on the side was kind of, at first it was kind of hit or miss. Some weeks were better than others. Some weeks I had more shows, some weeks less. And so there wasn't that sort of consistent rate of pay. And so it was hard to kind of quantify, how I was doing because it was an up and down kind of a thing. I mean, even now it sort of, gets a little dicey every now and again, but less so in the last, bunch of years since I've sort of, made the leap into, the popular little monkey that I am. But when I started, it was hard because I'm a little nervous about things, about sort of success or failure. And I always, worried, what if I'm not able to get money this week? What if, I don't get the thing? And that was very nerve-wracking at first. But, and it was hard sometimes because sometimes I'd have, when I'd have those sort of stretches of no shows or no bookings, I'd think to myself, should I bail? Should I, just go back into teaching or do whatever? But then I thought, no, let me just stick it out and see how it goes. And if, take a shot and see where it leads me. And, thankfully I did, because had I not stuck with it, it wouldn't have been the success that it is now. But, it was very hard to do that at first, that sort of uncertainty. It was kind of ooky, if that's a word.
It is now. So, you know what?
Pointing words, that's what I'm doing.
No, I totally agree 100%. I think that is one of the most dangerous and difficult parts of making that sort of a transition. There's many entrepreneurs, much like myself, who are somewhat thrust into entrepreneurship for one reason or another. Many of the listeners know the story where I was diagnosed with Crohn's and put on an unpaid medical leave. And at that point, I said to myself, it's a good time to do something else, versus sit around and dwell on, what I could have been sitting around to dwell on. And it's a different thing. It takes a lot of gut and willpower to begin stepping away from that security, to begin stepping away from that knowledge that you don't have to question how you're going to make ends meet. You know that on Friday they're going to be there. And it's very, very different when you're dealing with a situation of personal clients and not having a structured way to have them coming in the door, and just kind of go with your gut into the unknown. So the uncertainty, and the willpower, the balance of how you manage to get through that portion. What do you think really kept you going during that period of uncertainty, during that period of distrust in what was going to come next?
Well, it was sort of the thing that kept me going was considering the alternative, because, I've had jobs in my life. I worked the Stop and Shop for a while. I was in college. I had, different jobs here or there. I've had different teaching jobs. And I kept saying to myself, the alternative is going back into teaching, because that's what I was sort of qualified for. That's what most of my experience was. And I said, if, as nerve-wracking as this is, the alternative is kind of, not worse. It's not like it's a death sentence. It's teaching. It's, not coal mining or anything. No offense to coal miners. But, the thing was, it wasn't a bad alternative, but it was sort of an unsavory alternative. It was a thing I didn't want to go back to. I wanted to, do that. And so that kept me sort of going. As nerve-wracking as it was, I knew I'd have to stick it out and play it out until the point, if it totally wasn't working, I'd have to go to plan B. I'd have to go back into teaching or do something else. But, I knew if I considered the alternative, what I wanted to do was worth trying to do, pretty much.
You had faith in yourself, and you recognized the simplicity of the pros and cons of the situation. Just basically, you know what? Here's the worst that could happen, so why bother going back to that now? And that's what a lot of people should consider if they are in a position where, they're questioning whether or not an entrepreneurial journey is something that they're interested in. Clearly it must be if you're listening to the show. It's something you may be fumbling with. And if it is, and you're in a position where, you know what, much like Joe, you found the job or the dream career that you thought you wanted, and you're just not feeling fulfilled, think about it. That's pretty much what you're going to go back to is what it is that you're not feeling fulfilled with. So why would you bother doing that now? Why not take the chance on yourself, if nothing else? So that I love that you went for it, Joe, and made sure that you set that security up for yourself in making that transition. What do you feel helped you the most during making the transition? The paycheck was the hardest part, and of course, having the willpower to get through it. But when you were making that transition and you were dealing with going from full-time teaching into part-time teaching, how were you able to set that position up for yourself to make that easier? Was that something that you began looking for, or was it something that just kind of happened upon you and decided, okay, this is the opportunity? What do you feel really helped you make that, initial transition into starting this on a part-time basis?
Well, see, the problem that I had initially is, I was doing birthday parties. I did some, couple of events. I knew some people that had an entertainment company where they did corporate events, and so I got hired through them to do different things, and things like that. But the problem was a lot of my core business was preschools and schools, and the problem was I was teaching during the day, and that's when schools were in session, and so I had no ability to take shows. I was being offered shows during the day for preschools and elementary schools, but I wasn't able to take them because I was, still teaching full time. And
right.
So I decided, I could work in an after-school program because that had, late afternoon and early evening hours, and so I could do shows during the day at, as a storyteller, and then work in the late afternoon and evening in the after-school program. So that way I could balance things out, so that way I could still have sort of the money coming in from my after-school job, but be able to ply my trade during the day when, business was there. And I, sort of had a plan to sort of wean myself off of, actual work, as it were, working in the after-school program when I got to the point of success, when I got to the point where I could, stabilize my income with my storytelling, then I could make the transition, out of the part-time job and into full-time storytelling. And so it all, it evens out in the end. So,
Joe, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about, the storytelling as a whole. Tell us about the type of stories that you tell some of your audiences and where some of your audiences are located. I know you're, I believe, Brookline or Brighton, Massachusetts, correct?
Yep, I live in Brighton. I figured early on, I have limited business sense. That's the sort of side of this job that I've had to develop. I'm very good at being a storyteller. I can write stories, tell stories, but it's the business side of things that I had to sort of learn as I went on. And the thing was, I had to look at my market. As I said, there's a lot of storytellers out there. In fact, there's a large community of storytellers in Massachusetts. The problem is a lot of storytellers do shows for older children and adults. And the problem is there's not a lot of venues for those. And so business is few and far between when you do that. And so because I had experience as a preschool teacher, and because I sort of liked that age, I do a lot of storytelling for that age group. And that's where the bulk of my business comes from, because they need enrichment, they need, different forms of art to come in, and that's the need that I fill. And so a lot of the stories that I have are on sort of that level, fairy tales, folk tales, kids, I have stories all the way up to adults. I have stories for pretty much every age, but that's the age that I love the most, the preschool, kindergarten age. And so the stories that I have are stories, with that demographic in mind. And when I write stories, I write it sort of on that level. So I like stories that are fun and funny, and they're cute because, 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds think some of the silliest things are funny as heck. And, and that's the kind of way my brain is too, which is really sad some days. It's good for this job, but, that I could think like a 5-year-old, but not good for any other part of my life. So, ask my wife, whose eye twitches constantly because this is the way I behave. So.
Too much. So you write all of your own stories, I'm assuming. You don't use familiar stories of any sort that the kids would be, familiar with. You write your own stories and then create your own characters. Is that correct?
Yeah, a little of both, actually. I have, I use stories. I have, tons of storytelling resource material, multicultural tales from around the world. And I also tell a lot of classic stories, Three Pigs, things like that. So I balance it out. I have a sort of a little of everything. So that way, especially when I'm trying to get an audience familiar with what I do, I start with something familiar, sort of a classic tale, Jack and the Beanstalk, Three Pigs, something to sort of get them used to what this is, because a lot of people have never seen a storyteller, and they've been read books, they've had, stories like that, but no one's ever seen a physical, actual storyteller. And so I start them off with something traditional, something familiar, and then move on into, stories from different places and a lot of stories that I write on my own. So I have a good balance in my collection of tales. I have a little bit of everything. So.
Awesome. And I also know that you host and provide workshops. So can you tell us a little bit about those?
I do indeed. Well, the cool part about storytelling is that it's a very neat art form, and it's also a very accessible art form. It's something that everyone can do. Everyone has a story. If you've ever you have a child, so you've heard stories. When your child was young, when they talk, as soon as they can talk, they tell stories. Their whole life exists in stories. And so it's something that everyone can do. And when I got in the field and started telling stories, I saw that there was a need for it in the classroom and even with parents, about telling stories, because it's a really, it's what I do for a living, but boiled down to its essence, it's a very simple sort of an art form. It's something that everyone can do, and with a few techniques, a few different things, you can really be an effective storyteller, and you can really make a difference. And so I have workshops with teachers to help them, sort of tell stories in the classroom and where to find material, how to present it, different ways to engage the audience. And it's really made a difference in a lot of places. I've gotten a lot of positive reviews that people say, it has really helped, that end of the curriculum, which is nice. And that's what I, try to do, because I've always had a passion for, reading and literacy, and anything that sort of supports that and helps that along, I'm, always willing to help and do my part. And so, doing the workshops really helps to sort of spread the good word of storytelling and reading. And, I like to do that to sort of, inspire others to do what I kind of do.
I love that you are continuing with your teaching as well as the storytelling. Like, you have wrapped it all up, and it's just another one of the pivots in your journey and your growth as an entrepreneur. And again, I just thought that was a really cool piece to kind of pull out there, and to have the audience recognize that, what, he still gets to do teaching. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like you left the teaching behind. You've still worked it into what you do, and it's still a big piece of who you are as a storyteller. So I commend you for the setup there and the way you've designed everything. That's outstanding. Joe, if you had a time machine and could go back, say, 10, 15 years and tell yourself one thing, what do you think that would be?
other than buying stock in Google, because that's what I would certainly do, that made me, that would be a good thing, but I'm always buying the wrong thing. So, I put money in AOL. That was good. No, I'm kidding. But I would basically tell myself to, as not bad as it would be, but to leave teaching earlier than I did. I think I stayed in the field as a preschool teacher about 3 years too long. I was starting to get antsy, starting to get burnt out, but I stuck with it because I didn't see another option, and I was, the sort of thought of being a storyteller kind of was rumbling around in my head, but I never thought I could actually bring it to fruition and make myself a storyteller. And so that kind of fear led me to stay longer than I should. And if I had a time machine, I would say, you know what, get out there and do it sooner. That way you can, be a little more ahead of the game and start the process earlier. Because then I would be a little more, further along than I am at the moment, and which is I'm cool with where I am. I'm very happy to be in the position I am in life, but it could have started sooner. I could have saved myself a little less, a little more aggravation. It would have been, less aggravation on me, so I could have saved a bunch of that. And I would have definitely told myself to take more chances. Just don't be, because it is kind of hard, as we discussed about not having that steady paycheck. It's kind of a little nerve-wracking, but take chances. Don't worry about obviously don't put yourself in a position where you're going to be in financial ruin and end up having a big sign on the side of the road that said we'll tell stories for food, but but take a little more chance and get a little more out there. Take a few more risks to try to, get what you want in a quicker way or a better way. That's important.
Definitely. Be open to opportunity, recognize, and try to be able to recognize when those opportunities are available. Yep. Believe in yourself, and really try to go for it versus hindering yourself. Sometimes you don't need to listen to that internal voice. It's like, dude, that's not going to work out. But Joe, the show is really designed to, help entrepreneurs come up with an idea for a new industry, kind of pull something out of somewhere that we haven't actually had the opportunity to explore on the show. So being that you are our very first storyteller, I am very curious what your answer to this very next question might be. If you could do one thing, if you could change one thing, anything at all in your business, what would it be and why?
That is pretty much an easy answer for me. I would have somebody handling me. I would want someone doing the business side of the business. As I tell people, the best analogy, the best way I could put it is that right now I'm organ grinder and monkey, and I'd rather just be monkey. Someone turn the crank and I dance. That's the way I would like life to be, because the hardest part of doing what I do sometimes is that as I get busier, as I get more popular, my schools that I work with are in Boston, Brookline, but they're also in different parts of the state, and they're in New Hampshire, and they're in Rhode Island, and I do things in Connecticut. And the busier I get and the bigger I get, the harder it is to maintain the creative side of me. Because that's the hard thing, because what I do is not just, I'm not like selling a product, I'm not selling, a thing. It's an actual thing. I'm actually selling me, so I have to actually go out there and do all the shows. And so it's very hard to balance the creative side of me and the business side of me. And so if I had that magic wand and could wave it, I'd have somebody sort of doing that side of things. You know what I'm saying? Getting shows for me, booking dates, giving, opening new opportunities for me, because you put me in front of an audience and I'll kill. That's never a problem with me. It's a matter of getting in front of that audience that's the challenge. I'm saying it's a matter of finding the contact, getting the show, getting the bookings, doing all the contract work, then getting to the show. There's a lot to get to the end product, and the end product is awesome. It's just getting there that's a really, hard task sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. When you're caught up in working in the business and doing what it is that you love, it's very, very difficult to focus on managing the business and actually moving forward with scaling. So I 100% hear you loud and clear. That's a good one, Joe. Please share the best way for our listeners to go ahead and find you so that, if they're interested in having you stop by to do a story or interested in participating in any of your workshops, please share the best way for them to find you.
The easiest way is through my website, which is bigjoe.com. Nice and easy. That was the coup of my business, by the way, because, this was back in the late 90s when the internet was just sort of getting big, and a big clothing company had given up the name bigjoe.com, and I scooped it up, and I had it before I had any sort of a business. And now that I have it, it's really cool because it's something that everybody kind of wants. It's nice and simple. It's bigjoe.com, and my email is bigjoe@bigjoe.com, nice and easy, and that's sort of the best way to reach me.
Joe, you have been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for everything.
You have only what you're looking to get out of to go back to. Like Joe said, consider the alternatives. When those negative little voices are creeping in as you venture on your first entrepreneurial journey, just consider the alternatives. And then feel free to reach out to Big Joe at bigjoe.com. You can always reach him through our show notes page at technology-equality.com/Big Joe. Technology-equality.com/Big Joe if you want to check out the show notes page for this episode. Thank you, Joe, for joining us for this episode and sharing your time and expertise with the community. And Techie community, thank you guys for joining me here for episode number 58. Don't forget to head over to iTunes and click on that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. And until our next episode, when we continue to hear the journey, find the pain, and create solutions, enjoy the week.